We continue in 2 Samuel 13 today after Amnon's cousin Jonadab has gratuitously offered him advice on how to seduce his half-sister Tamar by pretending to be sick. So we'll look more at the character of Jonadab a little later, and we'll look more at the character of Amnon today. But before we do, just a few things to set us into our context here. If you haven't watched the introductory video to this unit of 2 Samuel 13 and 14, I really encourage you to do that, where we go over all these questions here. We're only going to look at a couple of them now related to our immediate scene. But to give us some context, to see how the two chapters fit together with each other and with what preceded, we looked at this chart here that shows the parallels between the Bathsheba story in chapters 11 and 12 and the two other women's stories in chapter 13 and 14, which at one level make a set of three women's stories. And then we see the parallels between the two chapters here in 13 and 14 in many ways, as you can see there. And both of these are posted at radicalbible.net, like all these kinds of charts are. One of the things unique to our passage here, and we'll see this more next time, is the parallel between this scene in 2 Samuel 13 and the rape story in Judges 19 to 21, which ends, as we saw last time, on the verse, "Everyone did what was right in their own eyes, there was no king." And one of the questions that a number of scholars have asked in the face of this rape story, if the point of having a king was to provide justice that the people didn't provide on their own, how is it any better now that they have this king? It's really a question about the monarchy as a whole, beyond the question of the immediate characters in the scene. Our chapter here is shaped in the first part in this large chiasm from Fackelman, and a number of key words you've been seeing, especially highlighting the fact that the sibling relationships are named over and over again, sister, son, brother, as we see throughout. And yet David is father in this immediate scene, but otherwise he's almost always king. We see David a couple of times here in relation to the house, but otherwise he's the king throughout, as you can see, and especially in the second half with Absalom, where he's not seen as Absalom's father, but as the king facing someone who's ultimately going to be a threat to him. We can also see in our immediate passage here some echoes of Genesis, and we'll see here today that when Amnon says, "Send out everyone from me," that echoes Joseph in chapter 45 after he recognizes his brother down in Egypt. But interspersing these things, we'll also see next time when Amnon tells Tamar to lie with me, it echoes Mrs. Potiphar saying the same thing to Joseph there. And we see a number of those parallels scattered throughout, both in the Joseph story, here in the rape of Dinah's story in chapter 34, and then in the named kin, Tamar, having sex with a relative there in chapter 38. So a number of echoes throughout Genesis, including the fact that David today will be much like Jacob is in standing aside quietly when his daughter is being sexually assaulted. So let's put up our key words today in our immediate section, which is right after Jonadab has given this advice, and now we'll look at this paragraph here. So notice that Amnon didn't say anything in response to Jonadab's advice. He didn't ask any questions. He didn't say, "But what if she won't do it?" or "What else should happen?" And notice that, as I noted last time, that Jonadab's plan is to have the father intervene. So as our scene began in verse 1 with Tamar in between the two brothers, so to speak, in between Amnon and Absalom, now Jonadab puts David in between Tamar and Amnon. And David, as we'll see in verse 7, does it without any question. Everybody obeys Amnon like he was the king. Of course, he's not, and he's not someone as a good character at all. But as we saw last time, and we'll see more today and next time, Amnon and Absalom represent elements of David that David's been trying to cover over, that the text now reveals here. And isn't that often the case in real life, where children are the unadorned versions of their fathers or mothers because they haven't grown up enough to be able to cover it up? We know David's very good at covering. He pretended to the Philistines that he was mentally ill, and we've seen all kinds of ways in which he's willing to act other than how he's really feeling or believing. And so we don't know what David's feeling, but we'll see what he does in just a moment. So Jonadab gives the advice, and so Amnon lay down and pretended to be ill. And I noted last time that the form of the verb here is the same form for what he already was. So whether he's pretending to be ill or making himself ill, that's how he is. And the king came to see him. And notice that there is no preceding reference to that Amnon didn't call his father. Why should the father be coming to Amnon? And notice they're each in their own house. David has his house, Amnon has his house, and we'll see that Absalom has his house. Tamar is the only one who doesn't appear to be in a house, because we'll see in verse 7 she seems to be in David's house, which makes sense that an unattached virgin daughter of the king would still be living in the king's house until she was given to a man to be married. So that's perfectly normal there. But the fact that Amnon can fully expect that his father will come to see him without his father having any reason to know he's sick, how does the king know? Is he just checking on him? We don't know anything about that. And notice, not his father. The narrator tells us when the king came to see him. As Alter notes crudely below, but fitting for the nature of the scene, David, who sinned through lust, inadvertently acts as Amnon's pimp for his own daughter. So, after the narrator tells us that Amnon speaks to the king, he says, "Please at my sister Tamar." And thus we saw earlier that he referred to Tamar to Jonadab as my brother Absalom's sister, but Absalom said, refer to her as my sister Tamar, and that's what he does. What is the advantage of that? Why highlight the fact that this appears to be incest that he has planned, even though he's not naming the sexual desire, but it certainly could be implied or suspected possibly? Why not just say Tamar or my brother Absalom's sister Tamar? We don't know. Maybe he's just following Jonadab because Amnon doesn't know what to do without Jonadab's help. We'll see how it goes. So please let my sister Tamar and come and make a couple of cakes, and everything about that is just wrong. So let's look more closely. And fortunately, we have recent scholarship that shows us how to read this correctly. So the verb for make here is a very unusual verb. It's the PL form of levov here. Lev means heart, and so LVV suggests something heart-like. It's used in the Song of Songs for ravish my heart, but it's a very rare word, and so it's hard to know exactly what it means. But Brownsmith has really made an incredible study of it and has highlighted that it echoes words that sound like heat and lust and things like that, not just sexual heat, but other heat as well. And so many of these words here imply what's going on, whether that's about heat or boiling, as we'll see, or even fluffing up like an erection, that the erotic elements of the scene are embedded in much of the language that's not explicitly sexual. So the couple of cakes is just completely wrong, and here's the similar word. And a great scholar like Robert Alter had gotten it wrong by calling them heart-shaped dumplings. But again, as Brownsmith and others have noted, what we call a heart shape did not even come to be until the medieval era. Here's an image from the 1300s, and the actual origin of it is unknown, but this is one of the earliest ones we see. But that's certainly plenty of time, regardless of when the 2 Samuel was written, to know there was no heart shape at the time. And so there's something else that word means. But the word cakes is wrong too. It's much more like dumplings and not even heart-shaped. What they are, as we can see from verse 8, when the wrong translation is used here for bake, for a word that is always otherwise translated as boil. I can't imagine why the New RFV translators would take a word that plainly means to boil and render it plainly wrongly as bake. So instead of the image of baking the cakes, what we get is an image of boiling matzo balls, as you can see here. And the reason that there are several reasons why that's important. The matzo balls as round balls could suggest breasts, as a number of scholars note. They're in boiling water, and so that's suggesting the boiling passion of Amnon. And it's something that either requires a utensil like a spoon or something to be fed with. So that's what's going on here. He's inviting her, really asking her to make matzo balls for him. In my sight, or before my eyes. Why does he need to see her make them, and why does he need to eat from her hand? As Alter notes, clearly playing with the equivalence between eating and sex. And that's throughout this scene. And we know that's not foreign to the Bible. We see it so clearly in passages that scholars and often readers don't like to acknowledge how explicit it is, like in John's Gospel, chapter 6, where Jesus says, "You must eat my flesh." And eating my flesh is an obvious sexual image, or it's cannibalism, and plainly it's not meant to be cannibalistic in John's Gospel. It's meant not to be literal either. It's meant to be metaphorical about the call to know one another and have intimate, physical, incarnate relationships. Again, not sexually as such, but the Word made flesh is so key to John's Gospel. So throughout the Hebrew Bible, and throughout history and life, food and sexuality are tightly intertwined. And of course, how often do people go out to eat for a meal meal before they go home and consummate the evening, so to speak. So everything about this scene is suggesting that he's inviting this to be setting up for a seduction. But David does nothing. In fact, he not only does nothing, he doesn't tell Tamar exactly what Amnon said. And notice the chain of transmission here. This is what Jonadab told Amnon to say, let my sister Tamar come and give me something to eat. But he uses the different verb that we noted here, and the something to eat, as we noted last time, a burya, means healing food, and this is, as Dick Hems notes, libido cakes, or libido balls, if you will, to speak, suggesting the much more explicit element of that, and that's what we hear here. So David, in transmitting what Amnon said to him, which is already different than what Jonadab said to him, now we're playing a game of telephone here. And this translation is wrong as well. You can see on the other side, I put it here, David sent Tamar from his house. And that's what's so important to see here, that she's in his house. It's ambiguous in this English, sent home to Tamar, but it's plainly, he sent to his own house to Tamar, saying, go to your brother. And what's not clear here is, did David go, or did he send a message to Tamar? So we don't even know if he can bother to speak directly to his daughter here, or if he's just simply sending a message from Amnon's house. And we don't know where he is as this scene unfolds, but plainly there are other people in Amnon's house, as we'll see in just a moment. So the whole thing is incredibly ambiguous, but allows for all kinds of possibilities of interpreting what's going on in the scene. So he sends the message to Tamar, go to your brother Amnon's house, so far so good, and prepare food for him. Notice that he's not telling her your brother Amnon is sick, and that's why you should be nursing him. Why does she imagine that her father is sending her to her brother's house to cook for him? How does Amnon usually eat? Does he have a servant? He's a prince. He must have people to care for him in this way. But we know nothing about that, of course. We know nothing about him at all. But it certainly can't be the normal, everyday thing that Tamar comes to feed Amnon, or Amnon wouldn't have had to ask Jonadab, or he didn't ask. Jonadab wouldn't have to tell Amnon to tell his father to send Tamar. So the whole thing is very mysterious about motivations here. And yet this is what David says, and so Tamar is going to do this without having any understanding of why she's being asked to do it, and she doesn't question. She simply obeys his father, and she doesn't even speak to Amnon. There's no sense of, hello, how you doing, or any sense that she feels that he's sick, or anything at all. She's just action, and we hear nothing about what's going on for her. So let's look a little more deeply at that. As Falkman notes here, Amnon's repose is shown from Tamar's perspective, and plainly that's what we see switched here. So in the first 6 verses we saw this from Amnon's perspective, and now it switches to see Tamar's perspective. So she went to her brother Amnon's house, and as my note below has, Tamar feels that she goes to Amnon's house, not to Amnon. She goes to perform a task. The purpose of her going is to do something for Amnon, not necessarily to see Amnon himself. And I think that's a nice point to it here. She's simply running an errand that her father sent her on. And we have no idea what their relationship is. Is she aware that he's been lusting after her, that he's been watching her and feeling so strongly drawn to her that he's making himself sick? How could she not have any clue of that? But we don't know. So she went to her house where he was lying down. So she sees him lying down there, which, if he's not sick, that's an unusual thing to do. It's presumably the middle of the day here. We don't know what time it is, but presumably it's daytime. And then we see her in incredible detail. She took dough and kneaded it, and what we hear this echoes is Sarai in Genesis 18, following Abraham's orders to do this in the face of the visitors. Make ready quickly 3 measures of choice flour, knead it, and make cakes. In that case, it is cakes, and it's matzah itself rather than matzah balls in our case here. But there it's happy hospitality that also has a sexual connotation. The visitors, after they have their meal, will tell the couple that next year they'll come back and Sarah will have a child, which leads Sarah to laugh at her tent entrance, but that's for the Genesis series. But there's no laughing in this scene, and there's no happy ending either. She takes the dough, she kneads it, literally it's doubled as alter note, kneaded it and shaped it, which makes sense out of making matzah balls. Why do we need to hear those details? Presumably it's so we can see Tamar through Amnon's eyes, watching her using her hands and doing these activities, perhaps imagining him kneading her, and although that's crude, is plainly a crude scene. So we have to, if we're going to hear it within the right context, imagine a lustful guy seeing her simply as an object. And that's certainly what he sees her as, because as you can see on the right side of the screen, when the scene is over, he won't even say her name or a female pronoun. He'll simply say, "Send this thing away." So she needed, and she, using that verb, made those in his sight, as Brownsmith, as you can see in my notes, says, connotating sexual arousal and heat, again, before his eyes, perhaps suggesting an erotic element of the kneading shaping, as I was noting, and boiled them, not bake them. Then she took the pan, which is, as Brownsmith notes, some suggest it to be a colander, but there's nothing to support that. That word is only here in the Masoretic text, Masoreth, so we don't really know. There are a number of ways to amend it, which is to say to change the letter into a similarly shaped letter in case we imagine there was a scribal error in putting the word down. But she rejects those as there's no evidence of it. But she suggests it could be a verbal form meaning infusion or steeping, fitting with the boiling, with the emphasis here on pouring liquid. So the setting them out before them, again, is not that. As she notes, the plain meaning of the verb is to pour out a liquid. So rather than seeing cakes on a pan, we should see matzo balls in a pot in boiling water that are being poured out of the boiling water and set before him, just as he's demanded. And when it all happens, he refuses to eat. And his refusing to eat links him to his probable ancestor Saul, who refused to eat and said, "I will not eat," when the question of Samuel's shade, having rejected him as king, has left him in this state. And that follows the women slaughtering a calf and baking matzah for him there, and then they eat. So this is certainly echoing the refusal to eat of what we have to assume is his ancestor Saul. And that brings up one of the levels of the story that perhaps David is acting the way he is because he wants Amnon out of the way, and as we'll see later, wants Absalom out of the way because his desire is for Solomon to be king. And he's not going to have his own sons assassinated, but he doesn't mind at all that Amnon is lustful and stupid enough to put himself in this situation. I'm not saying that's what David intends, because David's intention is hidden from us, but it's certainly not outside the realm of possibility. So we'll stop there and we'll enter into the next part of the scene next time, when Amnon engages in his terrible deed and Tamar speaks on behalf of the women and people of Israel to not act in this way. See you for that next time. Bye-bye.